there's a lot of conversation right now, and I saw this in the last cycle as well. But there's a lot of conversation right now about borrowing against Bitcoin and how you should do that, and if you should do that, and whether it's a good idea to do that, etc., etc. And I just want to cover very quickly my thoughts. I actually have a video called "How to Borrow Against Bitcoin" on my channel, which I think everyone should check out because I think it covers a lot. But I wrote down a few things that I want to cover. And first things first, before we even get started talking about how to borrow against Bitcoin, my personal opinion is now is not the right time. Now is not the right time to think about borrowing against your Bitcoin. Now is not the right time to start analyzing, judging any Bitcoin lending platforms. This happened in the last cycle, and everyone ended up screwing themselves over completely by trying to figure out how do I borrow against my Bitcoin so I can get more Bitcoin. Ended up giving their Bitcoin to companies like BlockFi, Celsius, all these FTX, etc., and all these companies that just ended up screwing everybody over. So I want to use, the ability to speak to you to let you know now is not, by any measure of the imagination of any capitalist, the time to borrow against your Bitcoin in any way. Whether you're talking about self-custody Bitcoin, whether you are talking about ETFs, whatever you're talking about, now in this moment in time is not the time to do that. I don't know how much more clearer I want to say that. There's probably still going to be some people after this saying, oh, he said borrow against your Bitcoin. I'm making it very, very clear. Now is not the time to do that. So what does need to happen, right? Let's look at the landscape right now. The landscape right now is we have alternate quote-unquote chains, right, is one option that people have to borrow against their Bitcoin. Is take their Bitcoin, put it on another chain, and then they use that chain's DeFi protocol to borrow against and get a certain interest rate against that Bitcoin, or they get a certain amount of Bitcoin lent to them, etc., etc. That is a no-go because you are literally using a shitcoin chain to borrow against your Bitcoin, and they're in custody of your Bitcoin. So that doesn't work, right? That doesn't work. You don't want to do that. You don't want to give up. If you've got self-custody Bitcoin, you do not want to give up the custody of that to a chain that you don't know anything about. The only reason you know about it is because there's interviews going on YouTube about it, or people are talking about it on Twitter, and that's the only way you figured out what that is. It's a no-go. Do not do that. I know too many people who have been screwed over by trying to screw around with these shitcoin chains and trying to borrow against their Bitcoin and this, that, and the other. And sure, it may work out in the short term. There might be some people saying, oh, I generated this return, I borrowed this money off that chain, and then I put it back into Bitcoin, and I made XYZ return. Sure, but you don't want to get caught on the losing side of that if and when any of those chains decide to fall apart. So you don't want to do that. Secondly, you've got services where they can share custody of your Bitcoin and offer you lending in cash against that Bitcoin. A classic example. Everyone's really trying to do this right now. I'm talking about Bitcoin companies that are now talking about providing these services. I personally do not think that is a good time to do that at this moment in time. Why? Number one, you have to know who is underwriting the loan that you are taking. And there's no real big players at this moment in time underwriting and guaranteeing the loan that you are taking. Secondly, I think most of these Bitcoin-only companies won't be around in the next 5 years. Why? Because now BlackRock is here for the business that they were trying to build, right? BlackRock, Fidelity, even Charles Schwab, if he steps into the game, etc., are going to eat their lunch. There just is no two ways about it. People didn't believe me when I said that, but look what's happened with the ETFs, right? The ETFs have secured, 220,000 Bitcoin, 230,000 Bitcoin in the space of 9 or 10 weeks. These companies are here for the whole gambit, right? That's actually good for you as a consumer because now you're not relying on VC-funded companies that rely on YouTubers and influencers promoting them, and they have a heavy burn rate on a yearly basis because they're not profitable, writing loans that may put your capital at risk at some point. So I don't think that's a good idea. In addition to all of that background risk, they're also charging 12 to 14% in order to do that. And I just don't think that makes any sense. I don't think it makes any sense to borrow money with all of that risk attached to it at 12 to 14%. Sailor's doing it at sub 1%, right? Obviously, it's a convertible note. It's different. But, you know, Sailor's doing it at Fed rates, basically. So those are the two options that I see. And I don't think any of them make any sense at this moment in time. Now, here's the thing. Here's when it will start making sense. Let's talk about that. It will start making sense. It's one of the reasons why I'm accumulating, in addition to self-custody Bitcoin, more ETFs, because you can loan against a stock. Like if you're wealthy, the way you exist is you have assets, you borrow against those assets, and then the appreciation on those assets pays down the debt. And that will come to Bitcoin. Why? Because it's already in the rest of the market. It's not even like, oh, we need to build this, right? There's a lot of people talking about, oh, we need to build this for Bitcoin. We need to build that for Bitcoin. You don't need to build none of it. It's already there. If I've got $10 million of SPY or QQQ stock, I can borrow against that right now. In addition to that, as Bitcoin appreciates, you're going to get, I guarantee you, you're going to get Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, everyone call you and say, hey, you know, if you've got a sizable amount of Bitcoin, let us manage your Bitcoin. We'll offer you credit services against your Bitcoin. You need a credit card. Here's a credit card against your account. You need a house. Let's figure out how to finance that house against the Bitcoin, etc., etc. These guys are experts at this. They're the best in the entire world at this, which is why the American capital markets is the best in the world. So all of these rails are coming for Bitcoin, and they will be turned on at some point, right? And so if you're sitting there going, oh my God, and this is my problem with the whole thing. When you're talking about that, no one with $10 million of Bitcoin is doing that. Unless they're a complete and utter degen, and they're a tech nerd and everything else, no one's doing that. Someone who has got into Bitcoin like myself since 2020, no one's doing that, right? That the market for all those shitcoin chains to borrow against Bitcoin or anything else are going down. The market is going down. Anyone who gets into Bitcoin after 2020 with a sizable amount of capital is not going to do that. They're going to wait for the institutional rails to come online for all these products. So that is coming, by the way. In addition to that, you've got the options markets that are going to open up. The options markets are going to provide a phenomenal way to generate income on holding, on holding the underlying ETF. Because that's what options markets do. That's what they're for, right? So there's lots of these opportunities coming. Now is, in my opinion, now not the right time to even have this conversation. I think this conversation being unearthed again sort of reminds me about, 2021, where people were worried that they didn't have enough Bitcoin. But remember, the worst thing you want to do is panic about not having enough Bitcoin, take too much risk with your Bitcoin, and then end up not having any Bitcoin, right? You don't want to do that. That is not the position you want to be in. Figure out how to create value in other ways so that you can accumulate more Bitcoin if you need to. And ultimately, this conversation is a rehash. I don't think it's relevant. I don't think people should be focused on it. And I want you to share this video out to people so that they know that, and subscribe to the channel because, I've now, as I said to you, I wasn't making videos for a while because I was securing one of my positions for the next cycle. That's all done now. And so what I plan to do is get back onto making more regular videos and giving you the insight of what's happening. There's so many things happening in the background. Been having so many conversations. Last week alone, I was on phone calls and helping people move $16 million into Bitcoin using the ETF, friends and things like that have been asking me for a while, or that I've been telling for a while, and now they're finally interested. So subscribe to the channel because we're about to start talking about some very, very important background movements that are happening in the institutional world. And I've been speaking to people who have advisors, and their advisors are now calling them. But, it's interesting because on certain net worths, they're getting phone calls, and certain net worths are not getting phone calls. So that's quite intriguing to me as well. So, yeah, subscribe to the channel, share the video so we don't lose anyone's Bitcoin to any of these lending platforms, chains, and things like that. I just think it's a terrible idea at this moment in time. And at some point in the future, there will be a good opportunity to do that. It may even be a Bitcoin-only company, but just none are viable, secure, low-risk solutions at this point. And I just don't think you should be taking that risk with the hardest asset humanity has ever created that you own a piece of. So again, as always, there are always oh, by the way, before we get into the 3 rules of Bitcoin, as you guys have heard, my time on social media is coming to an end because my message becomes less relevant of getting to 1 Bitcoin as we move up in price, and the people that need to hear it will hear it. So if you want to keep in touch after I leave social media, check the description. There's a link in there. If you haven't gotten to 1 Bitcoin, your mission should be to get to 1 Bitcoin. If you have gotten to 1 Bitcoin and you want to talk about, you want to keep in touch and discuss things after I leave social media, then check that out. But ultimately, there is always only 3 rules to Bitcoin. Step number 1, you buy Bitcoin. Step number 2, shut the fuck up. And step number 3, you get fabulously wealthy.